About 2 years ago, I designed this box joint jig, and I have a set of plans that I made that are for sale on my website. Over that time, several people have bought the plan and built it. And over that period, a few questions have cropped up concerning exactly how the jig will work in certain circumstances. So I thought I would take this opportunity to quickly run through some of these questions and to clear up a few misconceptions about how this jig works. First thing I want to do is point out there are 2 videos that I made covering the assembly of this jig and setting it up and using it properly. And I'll put a link to those videos in the description of this one. The only part that most people or some people have a problem with is the division plate, and I show how to do that quite easily without specialized skill or tools in this video. The only thing in that video that's different from this jig is the way the division plate is oriented. Before, the older version, it was cut on the edge. Now it's cut on the face. Another misconception is that you need a dado set to use it, and that's simply not the case. In the setup video, I used 2 thin kerf blades here stacked on the same arbor to make my 1/8 inch joint. The reason why I did that with that saw that I had at the time is because I had a little bit of run out on my arbor. Since then, I have this saw, there's a lot less run out, that's wobble side to side, and I can use a standard 1/8 inch blade to cut a 1/8 inch box joint. This is a sample that I just did quickly, but I'll go through the process again right now. I've got my jig set up here. I've got a strip that I've clamped onto the end of the table saw to stop the jig from going too far. You only want it to go halfway on the blade that meets this fence back here. To set the height of the cut, I just take the stock that I'm going to use, set it on the bed of the jig, and lower the blade down so that it just peaks above the top surface of this piece. With the height set, I can slide it back, take my pieces. I'm only going to cut 2 for these samples, even though the jig will take a stack of 4 3/4 inch pieces. Put them in, push them up tight against the side fence, and clamp them on. The next thing you need to do is to check to make sure that the carriage slides freely across and that your wood is not hanging up on the bottom. I had a problem, it was hanging up, so what I did was I used a slip of paper beneath the pieces just to space it up a little bit so it clears the table properly. Now I can bring it back to the start position and lock the locking blade in. Now that I'm happy that everything is set up properly, I can start the saw and start making the cuts. One key feature of this jig is how safe it is to use. Your hands never come near the blade, they're always behind the jig. Now that all the cuts are made, I can take it out of the jig and see how it fits. I'll do the clamp, take my boards and see how they go together. It's a very snug fit. One thing about this is that if your joint is a little bit too tight, what you can do is bring it back to the start position and run it through again in the same spots, and what it'll do is widen that out a little bit. Here I've got a really nicely fit joint. Okay, I've turned my blocks around so that the on-cut edge is facing down. I've checked to make sure that it's not hanging up on the bottom. Everything's good. It's up tight against the side fence. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch box joint with this single blade. The first step to doing that is to cut my 1/8 inch slots, but space them 2 clicks apart, which is actually a 1/2 inch. Each click on the advance lever moves the carriage 1/4 inch. Now with that first series of cuts made, I can undo my clamp, and this is where you're going to have to do a little bit of experimentation. Depends upon the thickness of your blade and how tight you want the joint. I am guessing now, because I really haven't done this before, that I need to move the work over 1/8 of an inch, but just to give it a little bit more space, I'm going to use a 9/64 blade, which is 1/64 of an inch bigger than 1/8. Use that as a spacer, put it in here, and then reclamp my work. Now that I have the bores properly spaced away from the fence and clamped in tight, I made sure that it doesn't hang up on the bottom again. I'll bring it back to the start position, but instead of make my first cut there, I will advance it 1/4 inch over and lock it in place. Make my first cut at that position, then move it over a 1/2 inch, 2 clicks, and make my next cut, and so on until I reach the end. Just to note that I actually had it backwards. What I really should have used was a 7/64 bit, and that would actually cut the fingers a little bit narrower. So I've reset the pieces and cutting the first 2 again. Now that all the cuts are made, I can try it out. Undo it from the clamp, and as you can see, there's a little bit of stuff in the middle there. I don't think that's much of a problem. Just clean that out with a chisel or a knife. Well, it didn't take long with the 1/4 inch chisel to clean that little bit of waste out and putting the joint together, and it goes together perfectly. A perfect fitting 1/4 inch box joint. So that's how you would use this jig to cut a 1/4 inch box joint. The same thing would apply to a 3/8 inch box joint. Make your first 1/8 inch cut, then space the carriage over 3 clicks or 3/4 of an inch, and make those cuts. Then you would space it back to cut the rest, just the same way as you made the second cut in here. And if you want to go up to 1 inch, it'll be the same thing. It's always better to have a dado set, though, if your saw takes one. Speaking of dado sets, some people have commented that the jig doesn't have any fine tuning. In actual fact, the jig itself doesn't, but your dado set does. And that's where you will be able to fine tune your joint perfectly to fit by using the shims that come with your dado set. You'll be able to adjust how wide the cut is, and it'll fit together as tightly as you want it to. There is one other thing that I need to cover, but it's actually better if you read it, and I have it well illustrated in the website article, and it's regarding left tilt blades and right tilt blades and the spacing of a dado stack and where the fence should be when you do that. I've had a few questions about that too. People seem to think that you have to cut into the fence, and that's simply not the case. What you do is you space it over. But like I say, it's a little bit easier for me to show in an illustration, and I have that in full detail on my website. Well, I hope that was helpful for people that have bought my plan and are building the jig. Also for people that are kind of on the fence, can't decide on whether they should buy the jig because they think that it needs a dado set. As you can see from the demonstration, it really doesn't. As usual, thanks for watching, and see you next time.